Number 1. Claire Miller. What would make a 14-year-old girl walk into her sister's bedroom and take her life in silence? Not out of rage, not out of fear, but out of something darker. Something that, to this day, not even experts can fully explain. This wasn't just any sister. Helen Miller was 19 years old, disabled, nonverbal, and entirely dependent on her family for everything. She couldn't walk, she couldn't speak, she couldn't fight back. And Claire? She was her little sister, the one who had once pushed her wheelchair, hugged her for photos, and smiled beside her in family albums. But on one cold February night in 2021, Claire did something unthinkable. She walked into that bedroom and changed her family's life forever. This is the chilling true story of Claire Miller, the 14-year-old girl from suburban Pennsylvania who committed a crime so shocking it made national headlines and left an entire community stunned. February 22nd, 2021, Manheim Township, Lancaster County. At 1:08 a.m., a disturbing 911 call came in. On the line was Claire Miller, just 14 years old. Her voice was shaky, but eerily clear. She told the dispatcher she had just killed her sister. When police arrived minutes later, they found Claire standing outside the family home. She was visibly distressed, crying, wearing pajama pants stained with blood. Inside the house, officers entered the bedroom of Helen Miller. She was lying in bed, still tucked under the covers. A large knife was protruding from her neck. Blood was soaked into the mattress and the floor nearby. Despite the trauma of what had just happened, Claire seemed strangely aware of what she had done. According to the arrest affidavit, she repeatedly said, "I stabbed my sister. I couldn't stop." Helen was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Claire was arrested at the scene, and the investigation into why this had happened began immediately. Claire Miller wasn't a troublemaker. She was a freshman at a prestigious private school. Her teachers described her as intelligent, quiet, but engaged. She was active online, with several TikTok videos posted in the hours before the murder. Some of the content was lighthearted. Others had darker tones, cryptic captions, sad music, hints of depression. Her family lived in a quiet, upper-middle-class neighborhood. There were no prior police visits, no domestic violence, no known abuse. From the outside, the Miller home seemed stable, loving, normal. But beneath the surface, Claire was struggling. According to court records, she had been experiencing serious mental health issues. She heard voices. She believed reality wasn't real. Her thoughts had become disorganized and paranoid. Some reports later revealed she had been hospitalized for psychiatric reasons prior to the murder. And yet no one could have imagined this. Helen Miller was 19 years old. She had cerebral palsy, used a wheelchair, and could not speak. She required full-time care and support for even the most basic tasks. But her family, especially her parents, were deeply devoted to her. Friends described Helen as someone who loved music. Her room was filled with soft lights, comforting colors, and posters. She was peaceful, gentle, and, tragically, completely defenseless. That night, she had been sleeping when Claire entered her room with a knife. The attack was quick, silent, brutal, and Helen never had a chance to cry out. Due to the severity of the crime, Claire was charged as an adult, something that's standard under Pennsylvania law in homicide cases, even when the suspect is a minor. Her defense attorneys argued that Claire was suffering from serious psychiatric illness, specifically schizophrenia spectrum disorder. 2 independent psychiatrists supported this diagnosis. They described her as having psychosis, hallucinations, and an impaired sense of reality. Claire herself told evaluators she thought the world wasn't real, that she was trapped in a simulation. In court, prosecutors acknowledged her mental illness, but emphasized the violent nature of the crime. Claire had waited until her parents went to bed. She'd chosen a weapon. She had walked directly into her sister's room and committed the act without any known provocation. After months of evaluations, hearings, and legal arguments, Claire ultimately pleaded guilty but mentally ill to third-degree murder. In February 2023, 2 years after the crime, she was sentenced to 12.5 to 40 years in prison, with credit for time already served. She is currently incarcerated at Muncie State Correctional Institution, a facility that houses female inmates with specialized psychiatric treatment units. The Claire Miller case shocked the country, not just because of the brutality, but because of the sheer impossibility of it. A 14-year-old girl from a loving home, a vulnerable victim who had done nothing to provoke her attacker, and a family that in a single night lost 2 daughters, one to a senseless death, and the other to the criminal justice system. In court, Claire's parents sat silently during the proceedings. They did not speak publicly, but court documents indicated they were devastated beyond words. Helen had been their light. Claire had been their youngest. And now, there was only silence. The community struggled to process what had happened. Counselors were brought into schools. Mental health hotlines saw spikes in calls. And true crime followers across the country were left asking the same questions. How did no one see this coming? Could it have been prevented? And what does justice look like when the killer is a child with a broken mind? Claire Miller's story isn't just about crime. It's about hidden mental illness, about systems that miss red flags, about families torn apart in ways no one can prepare for. Helen Miller lived her life in silence, and she died in silence. But her story should not be forgotten. She was loved. She mattered. And even though she couldn't speak, her life spoke volumes. As for Claire, she now faces decades behind bars, receiving treatment for the illness that may have clouded her mind the night of the murder. This case reminds us of a painful truth. Sometimes the darkest horrors don't come from strangers, but from the people closest to us. And sometimes, even the ones we think we understand, are hiding something we'll never truly comprehend. Number 2. Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier. On the morning of May 31st, 2014, in the quiet suburban town of Waukesha, Wisconsin, a 12-year-old girl named Peyton Leutner was found crawling out of the woods, bleeding heavily from 19 stab wounds. She had been left for dead by 2 of her best friends, Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier, also just 12 years old. The reason? They believed it would please a fictional internet character known as Slender Man. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. It was the result of months of planning by 2 children who had allowed online horror fiction to twist their perception of reality. And their target was someone they knew, someone they hugged, someone they invited to sleepovers. It all started with an obsession. Morgan Geyser was fascinated with fantasy, horror, and particularly the creepypasta community, an online genre of user-generated horror stories. That's where she discovered Slender Man, a tall, faceless figure in a black suit, often portrayed lurking in the shadows, targeting children, and driving them to madness. He wasn't real, but to Morgan and her friend Anissa, he was terrifyingly convincing. Anissa, more socially awkward and emotionally unstable, became equally consumed. The 2 girls fed off each other's delusions, and over time, a fantasy began to take shape. They believed that if they killed someone, an innocent, chosen sacrifice, Slender Man would spare their families and allow them to live in his fictional mansion deep in the forest. Their chosen victim? Their mutual friend, Peyton Leutner, often called Bella. She was kind, quiet, trusting, and she had no idea what her friends were planning. The night before the attack, all 3 girls had a sleepover at Morgan's house. They painted nails, ate donuts, and stayed up late watching movies. But while Peyton slept, Morgan and Anissa were whispering. The plan was in place. The next morning, under the pretense of going to the park, the girls headed to David's Park, a wooded area just a short walk from Morgan's house. They told Peyton they wanted to play hide and seek in the woods. She agreed, laughing, running, unaware of what was coming. At one point, they tried to kill her in a public bathroom, but backed out. Then, deeper in the woods, Morgan pinned Peyton down. Anissa stood nearby, egging her on. Morgan pulled out a kitchen knife and began stabbing, again and again. The knife pierced Peyton's arms, legs, and torso. 2 wounds struck major organs. One missed a major artery near her heart by less than a millimeter. Then, convinced she would die, Morgan and Anissa told her to stay still and not move, so the blood would come out slower. They left her lying alone in the dirt. The 2 girls then began walking, headed toward Nicolite National Forest, nearly 200 miles away. They believed that's where Slender Man lived. They carried snacks in their backpacks and were prepared to live in the woods indefinitely. But they didn't get far. Meanwhile, Peyton, despite her massive blood loss, somehow found the strength to crawl out of the woods and toward a nearby bike path. There, a passing cyclist spotted her, bleeding and trembling, and immediately called 911. She was rushed to the hospital and underwent emergency surgery. Doctors later said that if just one of the wounds had been even a fraction deeper, she would have died. Morgan and Anissa were picked up by police later that day, still walking along the highway. In their backpacks were granola bars, water bottles, and a large kitchen knife. During separate interrogations, both girls gave chillingly calm statements. They described the plan in detail, even arguing about who had the idea first. Morgan told officers, "It was weird. I felt no remorse." Anissa said, "I didn't want to do it, but I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't." Psychological evaluations quickly followed. Morgan Geyser was diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia, a rare and severe condition, especially in someone so young. She reported hallucinations, including seeing Slender Man and other fictional creatures in her home. Anissa was not diagnosed with psychosis, but was described as highly impressionable and suffering from a delusional disorder, heavily influenced by Morgan's behavior. Both girls were charged with attempted first-degree intentional homicide. In Wisconsin, serious crimes can be prosecuted in adult court even for minors. Despite public backlash, the court ruled that both would be tried as adults, due to the severity and premeditation of the crime. In 2017, Anissa Weier pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of attempted second-degree homicide. A jury found her not criminally responsible due to mental illness, and she was sentenced to up to 25 years in a secure psychiatric facility. Morgan Geyser also pleaded guilty. She too was found not guilty by reason of mental disease, and was sentenced to up to 40 years in a mental health institution. In 2021, after serving just over 7 years, Anissa was granted conditional release. She now lives under strict court supervision, including GPS monitoring and regular psychiatric check-ins. Morgan, however, remains confined in a secure mental facility. Her attorneys have requested conditional release, but as of now, she remains behind locked doors. As for Peyton Leutner, she survived. She endured months of recovery, physically and emotionally. She rarely speaks publicly about the attack, but when she does, she's poised, strong, and composed. In interviews, she has said she forgives her attackers, but will never forget what they did. She now lives a private life, away from the spotlight. This case raised urgent questions about mental illness, the influence of internet culture on young minds, and how justice should be handled when children commit unthinkable acts. How do you sentence a child for attempting murder? At what point does fantasy become criminal intent? And perhaps most disturbingly, how close did we come to burying a child? All because 2 others believed in a monster that never existed. Number 3. Erica Mae Butts. In November 2009, emergency responders arrived at a quiet home in Summerville, South Carolina. Inside, they found a 3-year-old girl named Serenity Richardson lying lifeless on the floor. She was covered in bruises from head to toe. Her tiny body showed signs of prolonged abuse, deep contusions, internal injuries, and marks across her arms, legs, and back. She was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. What made this case so disturbing wasn't just the brutality of the abuse, but who inflicted it. The killers weren't strangers. They were supposed to be caregivers. People who were trusted. Serenity's godmother, Erica Mae Butts, and her close friend and roommate, Shanita Latrice Cunningham, were responsible for the child's care. And over the course of just a few days, they beat her to death. Serenity was visiting from Detroit, where she lived with her mother. Her mom, Ishia Richardson, was in the middle of a move and had temporarily sent her daughter to stay with Butts in South Carolina, a woman she considered a close friend. It was meant to be a short visit, just a way to keep Serenity safe and cared for during the stressful relocation. What she didn't know was that this decision would end in tragedy. According to police reports, the abuse began almost immediately after Serenity arrived. Over the span of just a few days, Butts and Cunningham beat her repeatedly with a belt and a plastic coat hanger. Their alleged reason? Serenity was having potty training accidents. For that, she was punished, brutally and without mercy. By the time the final assault occurred, Serenity's body had been pushed to the brink. On November 3rd, when paramedics were finally called, it was already too late. The little girl had suffered extensive trauma, both internal and external. Her autopsy revealed injuries consistent with blunt force trauma and bruising that suggested she had been beaten over and over again. Investigators were horrified by the scale of the abuse. Serenity's injuries weren't consistent with a single outburst of violence. They were layered, old bruises beneath new ones. The coroner described it as one of the worst cases of child abuse he had ever seen. Both women were arrested and charged with homicide by child abuse. The prosecution made it clear that Serenity had suffered immensely, and that both Butts and Cunningham were equally responsible. There were no signs that one had tried to stop the other, no evidence of hesitation, only a pattern of escalating violence that ended in a child's death. During interrogations, Butts and Cunningham each tried to shift some of the blame, but their stories were inconsistent, and both eventually admitted to what they'd done. In 2011, facing overwhelming evidence, Erica Mae Butts entered what's known as an Alford plea. That means she didn't formally admit guilt, but acknowledged that the evidence would likely lead to a conviction. Shanita Cunningham pleaded guilty. At their sentencing hearing, both women collapsed in court. Butts dropped to the ground sobbing as the judge read the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Cunningham fainted moments later. Court officers rushed to assist them, while Serenity's family looked on in disbelief. Some found their emotional collapse ironic. These were the same women who had beaten a toddler to death, who had ignored her cries, who had never once sought medical help. And now, in front of the judge, they couldn't even stand to face their own punishment. The judge didn't mince words. He described their actions as nothing short of sadistic, and emphasized that Serenity's death had been slow, painful, and entirely preventable. He called it one of the most heart-wrenching cases he had ever seen. Serenity's mother gave a tearful statement in court. She talked about her daughter's sweet personality, her smile, her favorite toys. She spoke of the guilt she would carry for the rest of her life, for trusting someone who turned out to be a monster. In the aftermath of the trial, the case drew national attention, not just because of the brutality, but because it was yet another tragic reminder of how often children suffer in silence, how trust can be weaponized, and how sometimes the very people we expect to protect children are the ones who do them the most harm. There were no warning signs that Serenity was in immediate danger. Her mother had known Butts for years. They had grown up together in Detroit. There was no criminal history, no history of violence, just a quiet promise that Serenity would be safe, that she would be loved, that she would come home. But instead, a 3-year-old girl died in pain and confusion, hundreds of miles from her mother, with no one to comfort her in her final moments. Both Butts and Cunningham remain in prison today, serving life sentences without the chance of parole. Their names will forever be linked to a crime that shocked even seasoned investigators. But the real name to remember is Serenity, a little girl who never got to grow up, who never got to start kindergarten, who never got a second chance. Her name became a symbol for many in South Carolina's child protection community, a reminder that vigilance, even among trusted adults, is never optional, and that the consequences of one tragic mistake can last forever. Number 4. Rachel Shoaf and Shelia Eddy. At first glance, they looked like ordinary high school girls, laughing in the halls, posting selfies, gossiping about crushes. Rachel Shoaf and Shelia Eddy were inseparable, and so was their third best friend, Skylar Niece. The trio was like any other group of teenage girls, until one summer night in 2012, when two of them made an unthinkable decision. They didn't grow apart. They didn't have a falling out. They planned a murder. Because, in Rachel's own words, we just didn't like her anymore. Skylar Niece was just 16 years old. Smart, funny, and driven, she had dreams of becoming a criminal defense attorney one day. She lived in Star City, West Virginia, with her parents, and kept a tight-knit circle of friends. Among them were Rachel Shoaf and Shelia Eddy. The three girls shared everything, or so it seemed. But as the months went on, tension started to grow. Skylar became increasingly isolated from the other two. She suspected they were keeping secrets, talking behind her back. She even tweeted cryptic messages like, "You doing shit like that is why I'll never completely trust you." And she was right not to trust them. On the night of July 5th, 2012, Shelia Eddy invited Skylar to sneak out of her house and go for a late-night drive. It wasn't unusual. Skylar had done this before. She climbed out of her bedroom window just after midnight and got into Shelia's silver Toyota Camry. Rachel was waiting in the back seat. The plan was to drive across state lines into rural Pennsylvania to a secluded spot in the woods where they'd hung out before. Skylar had no idea she was being led to her death. Hidden in the trunk were kitchen knives, paper towels, bleach, clean clothes, and a shovel. The girls had been planning the murder for weeks. They even discussed it in school. And when they got to the woods, they told Skylar they wanted to smoke marijuana. They walked into the clearing. Then, at the count of 3, Rachel and Shelia pulled out their knives and began to stab their friend. Skylar screamed and tried to run, but she was outnumbered. She was stabbed more than 50 times. The girls later admitted that Skylar fought hard to escape, crawling through the dirt and begging them to stop. But they didn't. When it was over, they attempted to bury her body, but the ground was too rocky. Instead, they covered her with branches, leaves, and dirt, then got back in the car and drove home as if nothing had happened. The next morning, Skylar's parents woke up to find her bedroom empty. At first, they assumed she had snuck out and would be back soon. But as the hours passed, panic set in. Surveillance footage showed her getting into a car around 12:30 a.m. But the image was grainy. The car was unidentifiable. Shelia and Rachel joined in the search efforts, feigning concern and sharing Skylar's missing posters on social media. They acted heartbroken. They hugged her parents. They lied to the police. They said they had dropped Skylar off an hour after picking her up, down the street from her house. That lie held up for months. But Rachel was unraveling. By December, she began showing signs of serious emotional distress. She was admitted to a psychiatric facility after a breakdown. And on January 3rd, 2013, she confessed. Through sobs, she told investigators the entire story, how they planned the murder, how they carried it out, and where they had left Skylar's body. A month later, in March, police found human remains in the woods near Wayne Township, Pennsylvania. In February 2014, dental records confirmed what everyone feared. The body was Skylar Niece. Rachel Shoaf was charged with second-degree murder. She accepted a plea deal and agreed to testify against Shelia Eddy. She showed remorse in court, admitting that what she did was monstrous. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 10. She is currently incarcerated at the Lacan Correctional Center. Shelia Eddy denied involvement until the very end. But the evidence was overwhelming, and in January 2014, She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. She received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 15 years. She is also serving her time at the Lacken Correctional Center in West Virginia. In the wake of the crime, outrage and disbelief rippled across the country. How could two teenage girls so callously plot the murder of their best friend? There was no abuse, no history of mental illness, no signs of imminent danger, just a terrifying lack of empathy, cold planning, and an excuse that barely made sense. Skylar's parents, Dave and Mary Neese, were devastated, but determined that their daughter's death wouldn't be in vain. One of their biggest frustrations was the delay in issuing an Amber Alert when Skylar first went missing. Because she was believed to have left on her own and wasn't thought to be in immediate danger, no alert was issued. In response, West Virginia passed Skylar's Law, legislation that allows authorities to issue immediate public alerts for any missing child believed to be in danger, regardless of whether an abduction has occurred. Today, Skylar's memory lives on through that law, and through the countless lives her story continues to affect. Her parents speak at events about trust, warning signs, and the importance of communication between teens and their families. The murder of Skylar Neese wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't an accident. It was cold, deliberate, and carried out by two girls she loved like sisters. It exposed a terrifying reality. Sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones you should fear the most. Number 5. Teah Wimberly. On the morning of November 12, 2008, students at Dillard High School in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, walked the halls between classes like any other day. Some laughed, others rushed to beat the bell. But within seconds, the routine buzz of teenage chatter was silenced by the sound of a single gunshot. 15-year-old Amanda Collette, a popular student and marching band member, collapsed to the floor. Bleeding from a gunshot wound to the chest, she died within minutes. Her killer didn't run. She didn't hide. She was Amanda's friend, another 15-year-old girl named Teah Wimberly. This was not a gang-related shooting, not a case of mistaken identity. This was personal, calculated, and heartbreakingly tragic. The two girls had once been close, best friends since elementary school. But in the months leading up to the shooting, something in their friendship began to shift. Teah, who identified as gay, had developed romantic feelings for Amanda. Feelings Amanda didn't return. For Teah, that rejection wasn't just painful, it became unbearable. And she carried that emotional weight with her every single day, spiraling further into a storm of confusion, anger, and isolation. In the weeks before the shooting, there were warning signs. Teah had posted cryptic messages online, sent disturbing texts, and even told a friend she was thinking about hurting herself, or someone else. She had started cutting herself. She was spiraling in full view. But like so many teenagers dealing with silent pain, no one around her truly realized how close she was to the edge. On the morning of the shooting, Teah packed a .22 caliber handgun into her backpack. She showed up to school like normal, walked through the metal detectors, which at that time weren't active, and waited. Just before a morning class, she saw Amanda in the hallway. Witnesses say the two exchanged a few words. Then, Teah pulled the gun from her waistband and fired once, point blank into Amanda's chest. In an instant, Amanda collapsed to the floor. Students screamed. Chaos erupted. Teachers rushed to the scene. But it was too late. Amanda Collette was pronounced dead at the hospital shortly after. Teah didn't stick around. She left campus and walked to a nearby restaurant. There, shaking and distraught, she borrowed a phone and called 911. Her voice was panicked, broken. "I just shot my friend. I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to hurt like I hurt." The police arrived minutes later. Teah was arrested without incident. She was still wearing her school uniform. The gun was found in her backpack. As the news spread, Fort Lauderdale was left stunned. How could something so violent happen in a school? Among children? And why? The answer wasn't simple. Teah Wimberly had been carrying more than just a weapon that day. She carried years of pain, abandonment, emotional instability. Raised mostly by her grandparents, Teah had struggled with identity, loss, and depression from a young age. Her father was largely absent. Her mother, at times, unreachable. She had told friends that Amanda was the only person she trusted, the only one who made her feel seen. So when Amanda began to distance herself, Teah didn't know how to cope. She interpreted the rejection not as a boundary, but as a betrayal. In court, prosecutors charged her as an adult with second-degree murder and possession of a firearm on school property. Teah's defense attorneys didn't deny what she did, but they pleaded for understanding. They painted the portrait of a troubled teen with no access to proper mental health support, lost in a system that failed to intervene before it was too late. The trial was filled with emotion. Amanda's parents sat silently as prosecutors read the details of the crime. Teah, shackled in court, cried uncontrollably during the proceedings. When asked to speak, she turned to Amanda's parents and said, "I know saying I'm sorry will never be enough, but I truly am sorry for taking your baby's life." It wasn't enough. Nothing ever would be. In March 2010, Teah Wimberly was sentenced to 25 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. She was just 16 years old. Amanda Collette's family later filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Broward County School Board, alleging that the school failed to take action despite knowing Teah had made threats prior to the shooting. The lawsuit revealed that a fellow student had told a teacher about Teah's plan to bring a gun to school and shoot Amanda, but nothing was done. No lockdown, no alert, no security response. In 2012, the district settled the case for $525,000. The shooting at Dillard High School wasn't just a tragic incident, it was a symptom of what happens when mental health cries go unanswered. When schools ignore warnings, when emotional pain in teens is brushed off as just drama. Number 6. Nicole Kacinskas. In August 2003, the quiet city of Nashua, New Hampshire, was rocked by a chilling crime that would leave a permanent scar on the community. 16-year-old Nicole Kacinskas and her 18-year-old boyfriend, William Sullivan, committed an act so heinous that it defied comprehension. They orchestrated and executed the brutal murder of Nicole's own mother, Jean Domenico. Nicole and Billy's relationship began in May 2002 when they met through an online instant messaging service. Despite living in different states, Nicole in New Hampshire and Billy in Connecticut, their bond intensified rapidly. Within days, they professed their love for each other, and their communication became incessant, consisting of daily messages, letters, and phone calls. Their relationship, however, faced a significant obstacle: Jean Domenico. As a devoted mother, Jean was deeply concerned about the intensity and speed of her daughter's relationship with Billy. She disapproved of their plans to cohabit and refused their request for Nicole to be legally emancipated. Jean's protective instincts and firm stance against their relationship fueled resentment in both Nicole and Billy. By August 2003, their frustration had morphed into a deadly resolve. Billy traveled to Nashua to spend a week with Nicole, and during this time, the couple devised a plan to eliminate the person they saw as the primary barrier to their happiness: Jeanne. Their initial attempts to kill her were unsuccessful, including trying to poison her coffee creamer and attempting to ignite the home's oil tank. On August 6, 2003, their sinister plan came to fruition. As Jean returned home from work, Billy confronted her. Following an argument, he struck her with a baseball bat, and once she was incapacitated, he proceeded to stab her multiple times, resulting in her death. Nicole, complicit in the crime, assisted in the aftermath by helping to dispose of evidence and establishing alibis. The murder shocked the community. Jean was a beloved figure, known for her work as a paraprofessional at Birch Hill Elementary School and her involvement in local sports coaching. Her death left a void that was deeply felt by many. In the ensuing investigation, both Nicole and Billy were arrested and charged. Nicole pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and agreed to testify against Billy. In 2005, she was sentenced to a minimum of 35 years in prison. Billy was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Over the years, Nicole expressed remorse for her actions. She pursued education while incarcerated, earning her GED and an associate degree. In March 2025, after serving 22 years of her sentence, a judge suspended the remainder of her 40-year sentence, making her eligible for parole in November. During the hearing, Nicole conveyed her desire to honor her mother's memory by helping troubled youth, stating, "I want to improve lives rather than destroy them." The case of Nicole Kacinskas serves as a stark reminder of how intense emotions, when left unchecked, can lead to unimaginable consequences. It underscores the importance of communication, mental health awareness, and the need for vigilance in recognizing warning signs in those we care about. Number 7. Brenda Spencer, 1979. On the morning of January 29, 1979, the routine of Grover Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego, California, was shattered by an act of violence that would mark a grim milestone in American history. 16-year-old Brenda Ann Spencer, from her home across the street, opened fire on the schoolyard, killing 2 adults and wounding 9 others. When asked why she committed such a heinous act, her chilling response was, "I don't like Mondays. This livens up the day." Brenda Spencer was born on April 3, 1962, in San Diego. She lived with her father in a home described as impoverished and neglected. Reports indicate that the house was cluttered, with both father and daughter sleeping on a single mattress on the floor. Spencer later alleged that she suffered physical and sexual abuse at the hands of her father, claims he denied. Despite these allegations, the environment was undeniably dysfunctional. Spencer exhibited signs of distress and behavioral issues from a young age. She was known to have a fascination with firearms, a disdain for authority figures, and a history of truancy. In the months leading up to the shooting, she had been referred to a facility for problem students due to her absenteeism. Staff at the facility reported that she was suicidal, and a psychiatric evaluation recommended hospitalization for depression. However, her father refused to consent to her admission. In December 1978, just a month before the shooting, Spencer's father gifted her a Ruger 1022 semi-automatic, .22 caliber rifle with a telescopic sight and 500 rounds of ammunition for Christmas. Spencer later remarked, "I asked for a radio and got a rifle." She interpreted this gift as an encouragement to end her own life. On that fateful Monday morning, Spencer took her newly acquired rifle and began shooting at the children waiting outside the school gates. She fired 36 rounds, killing the school's principal, Burton Ragg, and custodian, Mike Sucher, as they attempted to protect the students. 8 children and a police officer were wounded in the attack. Following the shooting, Spencer barricaded herself inside her home, initiating a standoff with law enforcement that lasted over 6 hours. During this time, she engaged in a phone conversation with a reporter from the San Diego Union-Tribune, during which she delivered her infamous quote about disliking Mondays. Eventually, negotiators persuaded her to surrender by offering her a meal from Burger King. Spencer was arrested and charged as an adult. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and assault with a deadly weapon. In April 1980, she was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Over the years, she has been denied parole multiple times, with the most recent denial occurring in February 2025. She remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Chino. The impact of Spencer's actions extended beyond the immediate tragedy. The phrase, "I don't like Mondays," inspired the song of the same name by the Boomtown Rats, which became a hit in the United Kingdom. The shooting also prompted discussions about gun control, mental health, and school safety, issues that continue to resonate today. Brenda Spencer's case serves as a stark reminder of the potential consequences of untreated mental illness, access to firearms, and the importance of early intervention. Her story is a somber chapter in the history of school violence in the United States, one that underscores the need for vigilance and support for at-risk youth. Number 8. Linda Andersen's murder. On a cold January evening in 2003, in the suburbs of Mississauga, Ontario, two teenage sisters quietly carried out a plan they had been plotting for weeks. Their mother, Linda Andersen, lay in a bathtub, heavily intoxicated and barely conscious. As the water filled the tub, one sister held her mother's head under. The other stood nearby, watching. It took minutes, but they waited, made sure she was gone. Then they dried off, cleaned the scene, went out for milkshakes with friends, and returned home later to call 911. The motive? They wanted her life insurance money. They wanted a better life, and they believed killing their own mother was the only way to get it. This case would later be known as the story of the Bathtub Girls. It was one of Canada's most shocking and cold-blooded murders, because the killers weren't hardened criminals. They were honor students, just 15 and 16 years old. Linda Andersen was a single mother of 3. She worked hard, but she struggled. She battled alcoholism and depression. She was overwhelmed, financially, emotionally, and mentally. Her daughters, both bright and ambitious, began to resent her. They saw their friends wearing expensive clothes, taking vacations, living what they viewed as normal teenage lives. But their mother, drowning in debt and pain, couldn't give them the same. To them, Linda wasn't a parent. They saw her as an obstacle. By the end of 2002, the sisters had begun openly fantasizing about her death. And not just to each other. They talked to friends, shared their plan on chat apps, and even joked about it in school. Disturbingly, some of their peers egged them on. They didn't want to just escape. They wanted money. Their mother had a life insurance policy worth approximately $133,000. Enough, they thought, to buy new clothes, move into a big house, and take a vacation across Europe. One of the sisters even told a classmate, "Wouldn't it be great if she just died?" On January 18, 2003, they set the plan into motion. That day, the sisters convinced their mother to drink heavily. They mixed her vodka with Tylenol 3 pills to make sure she would be sedated. Once Linda was thoroughly intoxicated, they helped her into the bathtub under the pretense of giving her a relaxing soak. Then, when she could barely move, one of them held her head underwater until she stopped breathing. The other stood by in silence, ensuring everything went as planned. After the murder, they cleaned the scene. Then, in an act of calculated normalcy, they went out to a nearby restaurant with friends to build an alibi. Hours later, they returned home and called emergency services. They told police they had found their mother drowned in the tub, likely due to drinking. The responding officers found no obvious signs of foul play. Linda's death was ruled an accidental drowning, and the case was closed. For almost a year, the sisters lived with their secret. They went back to school, continued their lives, and began fantasizing about what they would do with the insurance money once the process was finalized. But secrets that dark don't stay buried forever. In early 2004, one of the sisters began to unravel. At a party, she confessed the murder to a friend, bragging, according to testimony, about how clever they had been. That friend went to the police. An investigation followed, and what they found was damning. Police uncovered chat logs, online searches about how to kill someone without leaving evidence, and even journal entries. The sisters had joked about watching CSI for tips. They had drawn up to-do lists. They even calculated how much time they would need to hold someone underwater to make sure they died. In 2005, both sisters were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Because they were minors at the time of the crime, their identities were permanently protected under Canada's Youth Criminal Justice Act. They were tried separately and eventually convicted, receiving the maximum sentence allowed for minors. 10 years, which included 6 years in custody, and 4 under community supervision. They served their sentences in youth detention facilities, where both reportedly completed high school and participated in counseling programs. One of the sisters was released in 2009. The other followed in 2010. By all accounts, they have since assumed new identities and re-entered society. The story shocked the country. How could 2 teenage girls calmly and meticulously plan the murder of their own mother, then cover it up, party afterward, and go on with life as if nothing had happened? Psychologists, criminologists, and journalists all weighed in. Some blamed the family's dysfunction. Others pointed to the girls' narcissism and sociopathic tendencies. But no answer could ever fully explain the coldness of their crime. Linda Andersen wasn't perfect. She was a struggling, broken woman trying to raise 3 children on her own. But she didn't deserve to die. And certainly not like that. Not drowned in her own bathtub by the very people she loved the most. The case gained international attention and was later the subject of a true crime book titled The Class Project: How to Kill a Mother, as well as a film adaptation called Perfect Sisters, starring Abigail Breslin and Georgie Henley. Both examined the emotional and psychological landscape behind the crime, but even Hollywood couldn't fully capture its darkness. Today, the sisters are free, living under assumed names, protected by law. Their records were sealed, their identities erased from the public. Whether they've changed is something the public may never know, but what they did won't be forgotten. Number 9. Tylar Witt. In June of 2009, an upscale home in El Dorado Hills, California, became the scene of a murder so disturbing it left seasoned detectives stunned. The victim was a loving single mother, brutally stabbed to death in her own bedroom. The killer? Her own 14-year-old daughter, Tylar Witt, and Tylar's 19-year-old boyfriend, Stephen Culver. Their motive? A warped version of teenage love, and the belief that if they couldn't be together in life, they might as well be together in death. Tylar Witt was an only child. Described as bright and artistic, she had lived a fairly comfortable life with her mother, Joanne Witt, an accomplished engineer for the California Department of Transportation. Joanne was strict but supportive. She loved her daughter deeply and wanted to protect her, but that desire to protect would ultimately cost Joanne her life. In the spring of 2009, Joanne discovered that Tylar had entered into a romantic and sexual relationship with Stephen Culver, a 19-year-old with no job, no direction, and a penchant for manipulation. Joanne was horrified. Stephen had been posing as a platonic roommate of sorts, staying in their home while going through hard times. But now it was clear he was sleeping with her underage daughter. Joanne did what most responsible parents would do. She confronted the couple, she banned them from seeing each other. And when that didn't work, she went to the police, reporting Stephen for statutory rape. She even turned over Tylar's diary, which included disturbing details about their relationship and her growing anger toward her mother. That single act sealed her fate. In the eyes of Tylar and Stephen, Joanne wasn't a protective parent. She was the enemy, an obstacle to their freedom. In the days that followed, the couple concocted a plan, not just to run away, but to kill Joanne, and then, in a dark twist, to die together afterward in a suicide pact. On the night of June 11, 2009, Tylar crushed up sleeping pills and put them in her mother's drink. Joanne, unaware of the betrayal, drank it and went to bed. That night, Stephen entered the home through an unlocked door. According to Tylar, she opened it for him. What happened next was savage. Stephen crept into Joanne's bedroom with a large kitchen knife and stabbed her more than 20 times. Blood soaked the bed and spattered the walls. Tylar later told police that she stood in the hallway, covering her ears and humming, trying to block out her mother's screams. Joanne fought hard. Scratches and bruises on her hands indicated that she struggled until the end. But ultimately, she bled out in her bed, alone. After the murder, Tylar and Stephen did not seem panicked. Instead, they carefully adjusted the thermostat to slow decomposition, turned off the lights, and fled the house together. They took cash, clothes, a laptop, and a suicide note that read more like a twisted love letter than a goodbye. The pair traveled to San Francisco, where they checked into a hotel using Joanne's credit card. There, they watched movies, ordered food, and prepared to kill themselves. Among the items found in the room later, rat poison, over-the-counter sleeping pills, and the film Donnie Darko, a cult classic about time travel and death. But when the suicide plan failed, they left the hotel and attempted to blend in with the local homeless population. Back home, Joanne's employer grew concerned when she didn't show up for work. Police conducted a welfare check and discovered her body. At first, they suspected Tyler had run away, but very quickly, suspicions turned to something much darker. A multi-county manhunt was launched. Within days, the couple was found in a parking lot in San Bruno, near San Francisco International Airport. They were arrested without resistance. In the interviews that followed, both Tyler and Stephen tried to shift blame. Tyler insisted that Stephen had committed the murder and that she never wanted her mother to die. Stephen, in turn, said Tyler begged him to do it, that she had manipulated him with threats of suicide. But the evidence told a different story. Police recovered journal entries, text messages, and letters from Tyler describing fantasies of killing her mother. In one chilling message, she wrote, "I want her gone, like dead gone." Faced with overwhelming evidence, Tyler Witt eventually agreed to a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and agreed to testify against Stephen. She was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Stephen Culver was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Tylar's courtroom testimony painted a picture of a confused and vulnerable girl, manipulated by an older man. But prosecutors argued that she was far more calculating than she let on. She had ample opportunity to stop the murder, to warn someone, or even just run. But she didn't. In a letter to the court, Tyler later wrote, "I made the worst mistake of my life. My mom loved me, and I took her away. I will never forgive myself." Today, Tyler Witt remains in prison. She has expressed interest in studying psychology, and some reports suggest she mentors younger inmates. Whether she will one day be granted parole remains uncertain. Joanne Witt is remembered by friends and family as kind, intelligent, and fiercely dedicated to her daughter. Her murder stunned the El Dorado Hills community and left many asking, how could this have been prevented? This case isn't just about teenage love gone wrong. It's about the dangers of emotional manipulation. It's about how obsession, when left unchecked, can become deadly. And it's about a mother who tried to do the right thing and lost her life because of it. Number 10. Marlene Olive. In the summer of 1975, the affluent suburb of Terra Linda, California, became the epicenter of a murder case so gruesome and bizarre, it would be forever etched into the fabric of American true crime. It involved a teenage girl, her troubled boyfriend, and the brutal double murder of her adoptive parents. The crime would come to be known as the barbecue murders. The mastermind? A 16-year-old named Marlene Olive. A pretty rebellious girl with a dark streak and a chilling sense of detachment. Marlene was born in 1959 and adopted as an infant by James and Naomi Olive, a well-off middle-aged couple who had spent much of their early married life abroad. James was a successful advertising executive. Naomi was a stay-at-home mother with a complicated past. She struggled with alcoholism, depression, and emotional instability, and often clashed with Marlene. Their relationship was toxic, volatile, and marked by screaming matches, accusations, and control. Marlene, in turn, was no angel. By her early teens, she was deeply involved in drugs, petty theft, and what she described as black magic. She wrote disturbing journal entries, flirted with the occult, and became increasingly defiant at home. Her parents tried therapy, tough love, grounding. Nothing worked. The angrier Marlene got, the more she fantasized about escape and revenge. In 1974, she met Charles Chuck Riley, a 20-year-old overweight drug dealer with low self-esteem and a desperate need to be loved. At over 300 pounds and socially isolated, Chuck was easy prey for a manipulative teenager looking for someone to do her bidding. Despite their age difference, Chuck fell hard for Marlene. She gave him affection, control, and purpose, things he'd never felt before. But she also gave him commands, and one of those commands was murder. By early 1975, Marlene had begun openly talking about wanting her parents dead. She told Chuck they were ruining her life. She said she'd rather be an orphan than live under Naomi's roof another day. Chuck, smitten and impressionable, agreed to help. On June 21st, Marlene put the plan into motion. She arranged to go shopping with her father, leaving her mother Naomi alone at the house. Before leaving, she made sure the back door was unlocked. While Marlene and James were out, Chuck entered the Olive home. He brought with him a hammer, a pillow, and LSD in his system. Naomi was asleep in bed. Chuck struck her repeatedly in the head with the hammer, then smothered her with the pillow to finish the job. But things didn't go as smoothly as planned. James returned home earlier than expected. He walked into the house, saw the horror in the bedroom, and tried to flee. Chuck shot him 4 times with a pistol Marlene had stolen. James collapsed in the kitchen and died on the floor. Now with 2 bodies on their hands, Marlene and Chuck needed a way to dispose of them. They wrapped the corpses in bed linens, loaded them into James's pickup truck, and drove to nearby China Camp State Park. There, in a secluded clearing, they placed the bodies in a barbecue pit, an actual public grill, and tried to incinerate them using gasoline and wood. But human bodies don't burn easily. The fire smoldered, failed, and left behind a ghastly mess. The next day, a park ranger noticed smoke and a foul odor coming from the pit. Inside, he found scorched bones, charred fabric, and partially burned remains. Authorities were alerted, and an investigation began. Meanwhile, Marlene acted as though nothing had happened. She told neighbors her parents had gone on vacation. But police quickly found inconsistencies in her story. The Olives hadn't told anyone they were leaving town. Their bank accounts hadn't been touched. Their car was missing. When questioned, Chuck broke down and confessed. He admitted to the murders, the disposal attempt, and said he did it all for Marlene. He claimed she planned everything, even drew diagrams, and told him exactly what to do. The case went to trial, and the public was horrified. Chuck Riley was tried as an adult, convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, and sentenced to death. His sentence was later commuted to life in prison after California's brief abolishment of the death penalty in the late 1970s. He was paroled in 2011 after serving more than 35 years behind bars. Marlene Olive, however, received a vastly different sentence. Because she was only 16 at the time of the murders, she was tried as a juvenile. She was convicted of being an accessory to murder and sentenced to a maximum of 6 years, until her 21st birthday. She served just over 4 years in a juvenile detention center before being released in 1979. That's right. For masterminding the brutal slaughter of her own parents, Marlene Olive walked free before she was even old enough to legally drink. And her story didn't end there. After her release, Marlene drifted through a series of low-paying jobs, arrests, and reported drug abuse. She was convicted again in the 1990s for fraud and forgery. Each time she re-entered the system, the press resurfaced the same question. How could someone responsible for such a calculated, grisly crime be allowed to walk free? To this day, Marlene lives under a changed identity, far from the spotlight. She has never publicly shown remorse, and many who followed the case believe she never truly grasped the horror of what she did. The barbecue murders shocked California, not just because of the brutality, but because of how cold, methodical, and remorseless the crime was. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't even about money. It was about control, power, freedom. And it was orchestrated by a teenage girl who believed she could get away with murder, and in many ways did. And with that, we come to the end of the video. If you watched this far, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which case shocked you the most and where are you watching from. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.